All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bonsert of Radio Retrofuture. And today with me, I have a special guest from Arizona. Hello, Mr. Steampunk Desperado.
Howdy, folks from Arizona.
Yes, and we'll be talking a little bit about what we do here. He's a fellow YouTuber who has the Steampunk Desperado channel, and where he does book reviews and also some opinionated videos, kind of like mine. And yeah, we'll be discussing that, of course, in a moment. But before we get into it, folks, today we reached 100 followers on our Kickstarter pre-launch page. So I'm very happy about that. I wished for more, but yeah, it looks like we're gonna launch in about a week or 2 weeks from now. Maybe we're gonna launch next Wednesday. I need to check, but we'll see how fast that goes. But everything is nearly done. The Kickstarter page needs a final check. I'm in contacting guest bloggers, which I also have to ask you about, Vaughn, when we're done. And yeah, I'm still working on making up a good deal for the early birds, which will probably include some additional ebooks for free. So we're working on that as well. If anyone has special wishes for early birds ideas, I'd love to hear them. And with that said, let's get back to the show. Vaughn, welcome to the show.
Yeah,
We've
thanks for
been
having
work.
me.
Yeah, we're we've tried to get this arranged for a very long time, but we're finally here. So yeah,
Yeah.
tell our audience who you are and what you do.
Okay, well, my actual name is Vaughn Troity, which is difficult for people to get right, even though it's short. And so I thought this moniker would be a pretty good one, especially since we got the Western theme, the Desperado thing. And I've been living in Arizona since 1982. So it's been a while. And essentially, I've always been into steampunk. Well, let me rephrase that. I've always been into sci-fi and I've always been into history. But ironically, I didn't get into steampunk until around 2010, which is when I used to be into writing groups and so on, and I got too busy with my software stuff I do for my day job. And then things kind of calmed down. So I got back into that right around 2010 and then started going to conventions again and saw all these people dressed in these kind of cool retro costumes, and got kind of interested in doing that. And my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, we started doing costumes like that and going to conventions in costume. And it wasn't very long till I decided that we had to start writing books, fiction in that genre.
Hmm. How many books have you written up to this point?
Uh, I've got 4 on Amazon, 4 self-published books. The first one is A Centrifugal Force, which is basically just a political sci-fi. It's kind of like it's my first attempt. It's a story of hackers overthrowing the government that got despotic.
Hmm.
But after that, I got into steampunk, and the rest are all steampunk. Fidelius Automata is the second one, and I have a sequel in the works at some point. Never got around to it, which is about a Cuban inventor who comes to America at around 1901. He meets Edison and Tesla, a lot of other interesting characters. Gets embroiled in the Colorado labor wars, and which were a very fascinating thing because he's invented this automaton, a spider automaton that can. He wants to use it in mining because he has lost loved ones to mining accidents. So
Hmm.
it was a fun work. And the last two, most recent two, involve a character called Ione D, who's a young female professor who travels the world and and she's into archaeology and so on, other things, and solves mysteries and whatnot.
Hmm. All right, awesome. Yeah, if you have the book links, I can add them to the video description or post them in chat. Um,
Oh, I'll do that.
yeah. So yeah, and yeah, let's. You wanted to talk about your influences on your work and steampunk and. Like me, like I'm a big fan of history and sci-fi, so steampunk is a
Hmm?
very natural fit in that regard.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, especially what I love about writing steampunk, or at least how I write it, is the speculative, the reimagination of history, and the what if you add those particular sci-fi aspects to it. Um, and that's kind of like what I'm now trying to formulate, also in regards to the collaborative
Hmm?
project, the Association of Ishtar, which you are actually started working on, so that's awesome. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's one of the many projects I, I have in the works, so sorry I haven't gotten very far yet. But yeah, and so yeah, one of my well, besides the usual suspects, like Tolkien and Asimov
mhm,
and Heinlein and all those writers that I read as a kid. Then I got into cyberpunk, uh, which I know you've talked a lot about. Gibson and Sterling and Neil Stephenson, which is one of
mhm,
my very favorite writers. And then into some of this alternate history with Harry Turtledove. I was
yeah,
on a long, I was along on a long airline flight, and I picked up a copy of Guns of the South,
yeah,
which
famous
shows
one. Yeah,
it shows Robert E. Lee with an AK-47.
yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's intriguing. So he has reimagined the Civil War, the South won, and what happens in the interim after that. And so he's a big influence because I was really inspired to what you can do with alternate history.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Tardov is like probably one of the biggest in that field at the moment. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And he
I.
actually wrote, and this is one of the most intriguing books I've encountered. He actually wrote one, collaborated with Richard Dreyfuss, the actor, and it
Oh.
was called The Two Georges. And one of these days, I'd like to talk about it. It's about an alternate history where the U.S. lost the Revolutionary War, and so
Mm,
the U.S. is this huge British dominion in the 20th century,
mm-hmm.
and then they've got airships and stuff, which are pretty cool.
So it also goes into the more into the steampunk thing.
Yeah, very steampunkish in that sense that all these world wars were what advanced technology. So if they didn't happen, technology was a little slower.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. That's yeah. I've been thinking about a speculative history, maybe a timeline, like an alternate world for the Association of Ishtar, where the Netherlands, or rather the Republic, and the British Empire stayed in one union. I don't know if you
Hmm.
are aware, but once upon a time, William of Orange became King of England.
Oh yeah.
And
Yep.
and there's the famous massacre in Scotland that he was responsible for. Um, so yeah, the Glorious Revolution, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be something if England and the Netherlands were one force, and the consequences,
Yeah,
what
because
that
it
would have
was
been.
so much mercantile, kind of mercantile conquest, which was kind of a different model,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty effective.
Yeah, well, it's funny because apparently the British were very angry at the Dutch model of colonization because the Dutch didn't include missionaries. In their
Oh.
Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons why the Japanese let the Dutch in and none of the other powers, because oh well, the Dutch don't have like the whole missionary thing going on. Um,
Right.
so
Yeah, you weren't allowed to even fly the British flag because it had a cross in it.
right, at least is that so? I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah, yeah, they were so anti-Christian that you could not, the Netherlands flag, just stripes, so no problem.
Mm-hmm.
The
Oh wait, the Japanese. Yeah, okay, I got it right.
Japanese, that is, yeah, the
Yeah, yeah,
Japanese.
I got kind of confused. Like really, but no, that makes sense. But yeah, that's actually an interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, I'm looking into like conflicts and developments to explore in the Association of Ishtar universe, and I kind of hope to get other authors involved. The next one will actually be about Tipu Sultan. Are you familiar with him?
Oh,
The Tiger of
sounds
Mysore.
familiar.
Yeah, the Tiger of
Oh,
Mysore.
okay.
He's at the moment considered to be one of the big Indian heroes who resisted the British. Although when I did my research, it turned out that he's highly controversial in India at the moment
Hmm.
because he was a Muslim. And
Ah, of course.
so yeah, there was this whole thing where the Hindus tried to paint him as this absolute despot. Here's the funny thing: using propaganda created by the British in that period.
That's not surprising.
Yeah.
There's some
So
really really great stuff about India, but yeah, I guess yeah, continue. I don't want to interrupt.
yeah. So the next video will be about that. Um,
Okay.
and that will be kind of like a summary because the character of our upcoming comic, Journey to Elysium, the main character of that is called Ghulam Ali, and he's a cousin to Tipu Sultan. And the idea is for his character is that because the Mysoreans were known for something very specific, which was rocket artillery. For some
Oh.
Yes, for some reason the Indians were very big on artillery. Had a big influence also on British, how the British developed their artillery as well. Interestingly enough, but maybe you might have heard of the Congreve rocket, which is a rocket that the English used during the Napoleonic Wars, and that rocket was inspired by the Mysore rocket
I
because
did not know that.
yes,
That's
so that's
fascinating.
actually an Indian invention adopted by the
Hmm.
British, and who actually had rocketeers, which was well, you know, rocket infantry. They were literally called rocketeers, and they basically did the same thing as the Mysoreans did during the Napoleonic Wars. Um,
Hmm.
so it's kind of like a testament to the effectiveness of these weapons. A matter of fact, like a couple of years ago, they developed like a stash of Mysorean rockets in India, like a couple thousand of them that were ready to be used during a battle, but were abandoned, probably because they lost that. So
Oh,
yeah, but yeah, the idea is that Ghulam Ali, he goes, if you've read The Wrench in the Machine, so you are
yes.
aware of Elysium in the moon, near the moon.
Hmm?
And the idea is that when he was a boy, he got so inspired by that he wanted to go there, and then he saw the Mysore rocket being used. He was like, what if we could shoot that at Elysium? So he started to develop what essentially became the field of rocketry. He goes to France because France was a big ally of Mysore at the time. Um, Goes to study in France to develop like this wonder weapon for his uncle, or he uses the guise of building a wonder weapon for his uncle. And well, if you know the history of Werner von Braun, the inventor of the Apollo rocket, you kind of
Hmm?
can
Yeah.
imagine what happened afterwards. So that's kind of like his character arc, and yeah, that's what the first issue in the comic is about him being an old man, and his program failed, um, due to reasons that will be revealed at some other time. Um, but yeah, what I now do with my particular and what I do well with the videos I discovered is that I start like with the factual history of events. Then I insert these characters in, kind of like Flashman. I saw you reviewed one of his
Yes,
books.
exactly. I was gonna mention Flashman.
Yeah. So kind of like the Flashman stories, where he is there, but he doesn't really influence the events. But you do get to see them, and then develop,
Yes.
go into the science fiction stories with those characters after the fact, so to speak, and the alternate history starts.
Hmm.
So
Right.
And that kind of also brings me to my next question that I wanted to propose. Like, where do you think is the border between alternate history and steampunk?
That's kind of hard to delineate because there's so much, there's so much of both sorts. I would say the alternate technology is kind of the delineating point, depending upon
Mm-hmm.
how much technology they have added. And, if it's just like, oh, well, the battle went differently and therefore things happen differently, that's another matter. But inserting, like, for example, in the difference engine where they developed the Babbage computer into something workable and commercially viable, well, that's definitely steampunk because of the different technology. So that's kind of where I draw the line. So most of the Turtle Dove stuff is not really steampunk, although it's awesome. But he'll have things like, oh, the aliens invaded during World War II, and so both sides had to unite to fight them, which
Mm-hmm.
is a fascinating series.
Yeah.
So things like that. It's a different form of technological difference, but it's not really steampunk.
No, no. I mean, for me, the for steampunk, I would indeed agree with you that technology is the driving force between the change.
Yes.
In the same way that in the Association of Ishtar, the idea is that because these rifts to other worlds are opening up, all this technology is pouring in, and they start reverse engineering that, which leads
Yeah.
to the massive changes. And well, then they have to use the technology to uh, repel aliens. But that's, I mean, more. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a weird addition thing. More a turtle dove thing, I suppose, in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely got a lot of that kind of sort of thing in there. But it's a lot of his stuff is close. Like I consider the Two Georges to be steampunk, just because of, well, airships. But um, but it's very fuzzy line.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. The same thing I have with a lot of fantasy. Overall, because I consider steampunk to be a subgenre of science fiction. Whereas with a high emphasis on the concept, on the high concept, while fantasy is fantasy and very focused on character. But then there is like where I was going with that is that for me there's a lot of fantasy with a steampunk skin, but
Yeah.
considered steampunk. Um,
Uh-huh.
but let's say, for example, are you a gamer?
Nope. Not since like the days of Mario Brawl and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of experience to draw on in that.
Okay. But maybe before that time you had before Mario Brawl you had a role playing game by the same people who made the Fallout games later. Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic. Are you familiar with that?
It sounds familiar. Yeah. Yeah.
It's old.
Cool.
But the intriguing part is like it's clearly a fantasy world. With inspiration from the Industrial Revolution because the world is
Hmm.
industrializing. However, how they weaved it in, I find very intriguing because it really has these themes of technology versus magic, where basically the new technologies are destroying the old order. Like you had this kingdom of dragon knights, and then they get destroyed by this peasant army equipped with muskets, for
Mm.
example. And mages, they literally have to get at the back of the train, which is definitely not a reference to anything. Because if they go to the front, they may cause the engine to malfunction. Uh,
Oh
so
yeah.
so you have like actual conductors checking everyone for magic at the door.
Kind of like a Jim Butcher concept because in the Dresden Files, where where a magician, a wizard like Harry Dresden, everything technological malfunctions around him, so he has to drive a really old, beat up Volkswagen because it's got no computer in the engine, for example,
Mm.
and can't carry a cell phone or anything like that. He has to use a wind-up watch. Pretty
Okay,
cool.
I have never. I know the Dresden Files. Everyone talks about them, but I never read them. I should probably try and get some
Yeah, it's
audiobooks.
definitely urban fantasy. It's not steampunk, but it's, and I've only read one, but I've seen him at Butcher at a couple conventions, and he's an intriguing speaker.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, that's one thing here in the Netherlands. Like, we've got an amazing media space, but they all go to the United States. So, um,
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
but yeah, who knows? Maybe in the future, I'll go there as well. I'm not a traveler though. That's kind of my thing. Um, so let's see. Well, you already kind of like touched upon how you got into steampunk. What other are other big influences on your own work?
Well, I do read a lot of history, and I've been reading a lot of Victorian era fiction too, like Charles Dickens and so on. And Dumas is great. And started reading some old Russian fiction like War and Peace and so on. And it's really good, I think, to get a little bit of a handle on what people were writing back then. Of course, Wells and Verne, of course,
Hmm.
Conan Doyle. So yeah, historically published fiction is another one of my influences.
Are you also into the shadow by any chance?
No, I have not. I have not ever read any of that. But yeah, I'm familiar with it. That's a little bit
I
later,
highly
isn't it? Isn't it?
recommend the audio dramas with Orson Welles and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, those were cool. Everybody, when I was a kid, people were still joking about shadow knows and that sort of
Hmm.
thing. So I don't know. Most kids nowadays would probably not have any clue what you
Oh
were
yeah,
saying,
no,
but
the shadow is being rediscovered at the moment.
good.
So I also mention it, and I also love to tell, that Batman was originally plagiarism of the Shadow, but so that's
Yep.
always a nice conversation starter. And
Mm.
yeah, but it's interesting also how the Shadow, because William B. Gibson is like, he wrote like 1,100 words a day, 11,000 words a day. The guy was extremely
Astonishing.
prolific. Yeah, the guy was extremely prolific on a typewriter, and he wrote the Shadow books always in the first draft that the bad guy won, and then he would write like how the Shadow would stop him. Um,
Aha.
yeah, and
I can
it's it.
imagine in those days the publishers probably had a problem with the bad guy winning too.
Yeah, probably. But the interesting thing is that the Shadow is really a vigilante character. Um,
Yes,
Although
definitely.
they toned him down in the audio drama because they had all these codes. So
Mhm.
instead of the Shadow killing people, he made them die in accidents, or they did something stupid, or he's far more mystical. He could like hypnotize people with his voice and stuff like that, and make them do stupid stuff. Um, so
Batman was like Batman in the very early days. He used to occasionally execute criminals,
yeah, yeah, he used to
and
have a
they
gun
had to
in the
change that,
original
of
comics.
course.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. What other offers would you recommend to people for from the olden days?
From the olden days, it's interesting. Well, the Conan Doyle actually wrote some science fiction. Well, of course, he's got the Lost Worlds and stuff, but
Mm-hmm,
that it's some pretty good stuff.
mm-hmm. Didn't he
Let's
write the Air
see. Gee,
Kraken
I
as
should have.
well?
Pardon?
The Air Kraken, didn't he write that as well?
Not sure. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know. It's possible. So yeah, Conan Doyle. Um, gee, I'm trying to think about who else I would recommend from that time. There was some of these right around when steampunk became super popular, like in 2010 and so on. They were starting putting out collections of little known Victorian authors, and some were fairly good, some were terrible but amusing, and there was a couple fairly good female authors at the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny that people say, "Oh yeah, women authors could not make it." No, they actually did.
Mary
They actually did
Shelley,
have some
anyone?
followings. Oh yeah, Mary Shelley. I
I
should have
mean,
mentioned her, of
she's like
course.
the grandmother of science fiction, for Pete's sake.
Yes. Oh, and Bram Stoker,
Mm-hmm.
Dracula and that kind of stuff. And they recently made that movie based on just one chapter of the Dracula novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One I should do a video about probably, because he's also French and not that well known now, but he's very important to history. Jean de la Hire. He created the
Hmm.
first superhero character and the first
I'm
cyborg.
not familiar. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
he actually the Wrench in the Machine as a reference to him, the Nyctalope, the Nyctular.
Yes, yes. I was wondering about that. I
Yeah,
I
that's a
mentioned that.
reference to
Like,
the
what is that
Nyctalope. Yeah.
from? It's a cool
Um,
name.
yeah, and yeah, it's basically because he could see in the night because he was a cyborg. He had night vision, and as far as I'm aware, he's like the first real cybernetic superhero. And
Hmm.
interesting in that regard because in his stories, this was also written from. Let's see, yeah, the first book was written in 1911, and he continued writing up throughout the Second World War, in which case France was occupied. And there he
Mm.
describes the hero collaborating with the Germans um,
Hmm.
while trying to mitigate the damage. So
Yeah.
that's interesting take. And
Yeah,
there
definitely.
is, yeah, I don't know if I have it near me, but there is, I think it's called, there is an English translation called Enter the Nyctalope that translates some of that translates some of the books, and it has some newer short stories as well that also tell what happened after the Nyctalope after the war. Um, so I recommend that. There are translations from it.
I would get that one from the title alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is hilarious. There was this one thing that's interesting and amusing. It's not the best literature, but they had all these like dime novels in the United States where they had like the Steam Man,
Yeah.
and he was Steam Man on the Prairies, and I can't remember the author's name, but he was like there was one guy, and then everybody was copying him, and so they had this Steam Man that would bring these guys out, and they had to fight with the natives and all that stuff,
Yeah.
all this
Bob's
adventure and
Electric
so on. It was
Ostrich is another one.
Yes, yes, that was great. Yep.
I
And so
already
I've read some of that.
have an homage planned for that as well to that thing.
I'm
So
glad to hear it.
yeah. So yeah, that's the wonderful thing about how the Association of History is set up. You can do all that stuff. So um,
Exactly. Yeah, I was thinking about the reason the thing I was pitching to you was involved involved Texas Rangers is because it was a story concept that I had actually for one of my comic book ideas
mm,
about like Texas Rangers involved in, airships and so on,
hmm
and battling subversives and things like that.
well, what I want to see of what we can do. I already mentioned kind of like my treatment of Tippus Sultan and his cousin Ghulam
Yes.
Ali. What I kind of want to see if I can get some writers together to like start with the origins of the Texas Rangers, and kind of explore what they develop into as these rifts as the rift situation starts
Yes.
escalating. That's the kind of videos what I would love to make. So we have like videos that are actual history that talk about like the origins, and then like continue the themes that go throughout that organization, but develop into, I don't know, in case of Texas Rangers, like containing aliens and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I also have this idea. I forgot what this confederation was called, but there was this Native American group, this Native American Federation at some point in the 19th century. It fell apart when they found out there were like natural resources on their land, but where they tried
Yeah,
to
well, it's
you
yeah, well,
probably
the
know.
Iroquois, but that was pretty early. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I think there was a later one as well.
Yeah.
And I forgot what it is. But I was like, well, what if that particular nation is being used as a buffer zone? Like a very dangerous rift appears in that territory. So the United States, like, well, we could go there, but then we will have to deal with those problems. So we're gonna leave them there. We're gonna make it a reservation, keep those people there. They can like mine the territory for themselves to kind of
Hmm.
like so they can afford their own protection against those aliens. That kind of deal. Um,
Yeah.
However, that
Yep.
reservation becomes more powerful because of that. Like they kind of do a Turkey, where they're like, well, if you make us angry, we let all these refugees through. That are kind of doing something like that with the
Yep.
monsters, like.
Yeah, there's some Native American characters in Fidelius Automata, and then the idea was that they had kind of a technology independence movement in my alternate universe in Oklahoma, and that was kind of an homage because my wife had basically a Choctaw great grandmother, so I had to put a Choctaw character in there, and there were several, they were from some of the different tribes, like Cherokee and Seminole and so forth. And so that was kind of fun. So I invented this opera singer, this Choctaw opera singer that like had toured Europe and so on. It's plausible. There were a lot of black opera singers that would tour Europe because they weren't welcome in the United States at that
Mm-hmm.
time. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What kind, like, if you had the opportunity and the time, what is an alternate history you'd love to explore?
yeah, well, the one I was thinking about, well, there's a whole bunch. I mean, the one I was thinking about Texas was the idea that Texas is independent and there's some other war or so on going on with airships and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the things I was going to explore. It was almost more of a diesel punk because it would be like in the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
That was one. I was also kind of had the idea of the United States not being independent from Britain, although I discovered that Turtle Dove had already done it. But then with the notion that, for example, when England outlawed the slave trade in the 1830s, that would cause a
Well,
revolution,
earlier they
like kind of
outlawed
a
it in the
civil war.
1810s.
Pardon? Yeah, I mean, I think it was partial. It was a gradual thing. Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
outlawed the trade in 1810, and I think they outlawed slavery itself in the 1830s.
Let
And
me look when
so,
the
but I'm
because I think the West Africa squadron started in the 1810s.
yes, they were definitely intercepting, slave ships, but I don't think, there were part of the problem was that slave labor was kind of important to the sugar industry, so I'm not sure they had actually quite abolished slavery
Well, they
itself yet
couldn't
at that
abolish
time.
it in the colonies because the despite all the tropes, despite it being an empire, they didn't
Yes,
have that level of control.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
so they basically embargoed Africa.
Yeah. There's some interesting there's an interesting one about in Flashman about that,
Oh, really?
where he signs up. He's always getting himself into trouble, and he gets,
Yeah.
has to leave England, and his father-in-law gets him on with a slave trading ship, and he has no idea that that's what it's doing. Of course, he's such a scoundrel. He doesn't really care that they're
No, no,
enslaving
he's
people,
a
but he's
absolute.
worried about getting caught and arrested.
Yeah.
And so that's his worry, and
Hmm.
he keeps getting accidentally get into all these scrapes, which is
Yeah, well,
funny. But
that's the whole
he's such an
thing about
awful person.
Fleshman, right? He does not apologize for anything.
No, he doesn't. He treats women horribly. He uses racial slurs constantly. You know, to a modern reader, it's probably shocking, but as an older guy, I kind of find it hilarious.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's. I listened to the first book, where he does all this horrible stuff, and it. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I'm Dutch, so I think that's also a cultural thing.
Mm.
Um, but it's interesting to because it doesn't pull any punches, you know.
No,
Also,
no, not at
like
all.
in like about Flashman's character, but also all the horrible stuff that's happening around him that's not his fault.
Yes.
It's just funny how you know. Well, there's actually a Warhammer character based upon him. I think he's based upon him, like called Cyphus Kane. Um,
Oh, okay. That
yeah.
makes
He's
sense.
like this commissar character, and he's basically Fleshman.
Hmm.
Just a more a better natured character, but also a coward. Um,
Yes. That's part of the funny thing about him is that he's such a coward, and it's almost that makes him despicable too. And in some ways I was like most upset with him from a reader standpoint just because he would like betray his fellow soldiers and stuff like that. He would like go and hide while they're getting bombarded.
hmm Yeah,
Come on, man the
or
man march.
when
No.
he flees from the from the Pakistanis. I forgot what tribe.
Exactly.
And they think, oh, he's like a brave soldier, bringing the message that they need help or something. Even though
Yeah, because he survives.
yeah, that's all he cared about.
Exactly.
But then he just
The
goes
hero of
along with it.
Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the people who are onto him, they always get like the worst of it. So, but yeah, I highly recommend the Flashman books. The first one is,
Yeah,
I
I've
think,
actually
Flashman
done
in
like
India.
8 or 9 of them.
Yeah, no, it's a big series.
Yeah.
So it's probably no, well, no, he does not die. I mean, he's writing; those are his memoirs. So
Right, right. He's very old, and he's some considering, how much he drinks and stuff like that, and all his dangerous lifestyle. It's just how could this guy survive to be
and
like
he does
90
not
years
deserve
old and
it,
whatnot?
right? That's the horrible thing
Yeah,
about it.
definitely
Yeah,
not. Yep.
yeah. Well, if there is like an alternate history I want to do, unfortunately there's very little literature I could find on it. But is life in the West African Squadron? That is a story that I want to continue. Um,
That would be fascinating because there's so much. I like referencing your thing on colonialism. There's so much misinformation about the slave trade and so on, and how it actually how it actually functioned.
hmm
And there was certainly a lot of African involvement in that, and it was a lot of intertribal warfare sort of enabled it. If not for that, they would have never been able to function because Europeans couldn't survive in the jungle. They'd catch some kind of horrible disease and
hmm
they'd die.
Yeah, I mean that's another a book that's currently being proofwritten by various people. Is the first book in the Casket Girl series. That's inspired by the history of Devil's Isle, which are
Ah,
the penal colonies in South America.
yes. Yep.
And the reason why they put penal colonies there is because normal Normal people would not go there because of how lethal the environment was to them. So
Yeah, the malaria and all that,
the
all
heat, the
those various
malaria, yeah.
things you could catch. Yep.
At one point, they sent women there, so within a few months, everyone had syphilis. Those were the casket girls, by the way, the original casket
Ah,
girls.
okay.
Yeah, they had
Yeah,
like
yeah.
these
There
these
was.
little wooden boxes called cassettes. So you've got the cassette girls and that
Oh
the
boy.
casquettes, and that eventually got mistranslated into English as coffin or casket girls.
Oh boy. That's yeah. That sounds pretty. It sounds like there's some pretty horrific stuff back behind that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my store, well, no, this is actually true. They sent women, female convicts there as well, with the idea that they would then move in after their sentence was done. They would move into the civilian colony, and procreate
Hmm.
essentially. Um, However, they were separated from the male population for obvious reasons,
Hmm.
and they were sent to a monastery. And in my setting, that monastery is where the casket girls are being trained and where the robots are being developed that
Ah.
take control. And where in this universe, the casket girls are connected with the robot thing. So,
Hmm.
uh, and yeah, I have big plans for how those units eventually become independent military forces as who hire themselves out as mercenaries. Um, so I already got like some names for them, and they're all female pilots. So that's already like an interesting tradition that they're kind of like continuing. So I
Hmm.
guess I have that audience cornered. Um, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to continuing work on that. So if you're
Yeah, I have
interested in
something with.
go ahead.
Pardon, go on.
Oh,
I have
if you're
something with
interested in
female
proofreading
pilots
it,
that I'm working on right
you're
now.
welcome. But go on. Now,
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I keep talking over each other. Yeah, no, I have something with female pilots in it that I've been working on the last year or so that it's kind of a future, it's kind of cyberpunkish, so it's not at all like that. But it's got the premise that there's this particular mind melding, this particular kind of mind melding with computer that for whatever reason men can't do it, and so therefore this whole force has to be female, uh, which is this kind of makes the dynamic of it a little interesting.
I actually have
But
something similar going on in the first Casket Girl book as well. If it's gonna be a female only thing, I have not yet decided. Um, However, there was a manga. I forgot what it was called, but it was also about young girls' heads being attached to cybernetic bodies to serve as assassins.
mhm.
I forgot what it was called, but it also had something to do with a particular part of the brain that is narrower in men than in women, and therefore it was as one of the characters called it, a girls only club. Um, because I think it is the bridge between the two brain stems that is narrower in men than
Ah.
in women. I think it was something like
Oh, that
that.
would kind of explain the kind of the intuitive, and some of these stereotypes are true. Women
Mm-hmm.
may be more intuitive than men on some
Mm-hmm.
levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's true, but I never checked that, but I remember that from that particular manga. So it could be true. I would need to actually fact check that, but
Oh, yeah,
that's
okay, it was a manga. That's cool.
yeah. It's a manga from like the 1990s or early 2000s. I think 1990. Yeah, well, early 2000s probably. I forgot what it is called. I did finish it. But yeah, it's like one of those fighting mangas with cyborgs and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd be interested in seeing that one if you recall at some point. Send me the name. That'd be
yeah,
cool. I'm
I
big
wish
into
I could
anime and
remember.
manga as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wish I could remember. I have no idea what it is called. I do
Yeah.
remember some
I've
of the
done it.
plot, like it was a brother taking care of her sister who had been turned into one of these cyborgs.
Mm.
Like he dedicated like his research to that type of technology to help his sister, because he needs constant maintenance for being a robot. Um, but yeah, I something something alpha, which is also of course a very
Ah,
generic manga name.
right. Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
Alpha.
Yeah. I was gonna say that sounds familiar, but you're right. It is a generic
It's a very generic
manga name.
sci-fi name. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
But that's all I remember. Like at the time, I also read Blame, which is a big inspiration for or upcoming comic, and also for Bound for the Sticks, by the way, the second novel in the
Hmm.
series, which is about this ever-expanding structure that's being constructed on Earth, and it just keeps expanding without any
Ah.
purpose or goal, and it even encapsulated the moon at this point. It's basically about this cyborg who has to look for a person with a particular gene that can control the system.
Hmm.
And he has to go through this ever expanding structure, and it was just scenes that it's just him just going through this massive structure. It's just endless bridges. There's like scenes like, oh, he's going into an elevator, and then the next scene is like, well, 600 days later, and then he reached his destination. Stuff like that.
Got endless possibilities for art. I mean,
Yo, yeah.
and visual. That's cool. It's a cool
Oh
concept.
yeah, they're like complete like alienated human civilizations in there that like completely had took their own course in evolution. So you've got like one group of giants and midgets and all that stuff. Yeah.
A little bit like the Ring World, the Larry Niven Ring World series, where the structure is so huge and ancient that humans have evolved into fill different ecological niches.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
there are human predators that prey on other, humans that evolved into herd animals. It's intriguing.
That reminds me of oh, what is that story of Lovecraft, the rats in the wall? I think that,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's something that I'm also looking into, to have like a race like that, having developed on one world or another, of very predatory humans. Um, so yeah, there's like so many possibilities to do. Also with the Association of Ishtar, like, oh, what kind of monster are they gonna fight next?
Mm.
Um, that's one of the big struggles I have with the military series, because they're fighting aliens. It's like, okay, but what type of aliens are now going to emerge? Like, what kind of strange niche beings are gonna come out, that also have like, staying power. I'm already very. You did not read Bound for the Sticks, have you?
I have not read it yet. I have it. I've started it. It doesn't. It won't read on my outlet on my verbal reader
Oh,
on Kindle. It may. I think it looks kind of typeset, or I mean, your graphics are great, but I don't. For whatever reason, it can't read. So I have to set aside time when I can actually sit down and physically read,
okay,
rather than having my ebook reader read it to me while I'm driving and stuff.
okay. Huh. I
But
have
I
not
will get.
had
It looks.
any reports of the. You can if I'm not mistaken, you can download multiple formats. So
Oh,
so if you go back to the link,
okay.
it should still work.
I
You
will
can
do
download
that.
like PDF or Kindle or
Okay.
EPUB,
I
or
must have
so.
got the wrong
You should have
format
like a
then, because I
multitude of
thought this.
formats you can choose from, and otherwise
I thought
you.
this is kind of like a PDF, and I can't listen to it. But I mean, the artwork in there is great, so I very much appreciate having that to look at when I get a chance. But I will look for that, and then I can get through it
Yeah,
quicker.
check out the link because you should have like apart from PDF, you should have other options as well.
Hmm.
And if they don't appear, let me know. Then I'll look into it.
Okay.
If maybe there's something wrong. Um, so yeah, but no one else reported anything like that. So
Yeah, I must have the wrong format then.
yeah, maybe. Let me know if it works out.
Okay.
Um, yeah, okay. But if you start with it, you probably have not reached that part yet. So I'm gonna leave that for you to
No,
discover then.
I haven't gotten very far in it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Um. All right. I forgot. We got detract. What were we talking about again? We were talking about alien creatures. What is your
Yes.
favorite type of alien creature that you or something that you would like to
Well,
include?
one of the things I'm reading Werner Vinge right now, Children of the Sky, which is he does some of the most fascinating alien races that you've ever could imagine. And one is in this book, they're pack animals. They're essentially packs of dog-like creatures. They can only be intelligent or sentient if they're together. So you
Hmm.
have like ideally 4 or 5 of them are one person, and these creatures they refer to them as packs, and they're both singular and plural. And if they get separated, they're just animals. And so it's an interesting dynamic because it involves situations like, well, what if one gets killed? If too many get killed, then the pack is like dysfunctional. And sometimes you can invite a new member in, and sometimes it doesn't work because they have to be compatible.
Hmm.
So that's a really I love the really intriguing ideas like this, something that's a little off the beaten path.
Okay.
And so these creatures, they actually think. And I was thinking with telepathy because I read the earlier version, which was A Fire Upon the Deep, and actually it's ultrasonic sound. They
Hmm.
actually communicate by sound with their other members of their pack. So if something happens, if it's too noisy, or if it's like foggy or really humid, so the sound doesn't travel well, then they have trouble thinking.
Hmm.
So
All
there's
right.
a lot of interesting ramifications to that kind of a corporate or kind of a collective entity.
Hmm. Oh, I'm exploring something similar in Bound for the Sticks, but there it works with spores. But I cannot get into it, otherwise I'll spoil it for you.
Okay.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. All right. Well, we're reaching the 1 hour mark. But it's been great talking to you and reviewing like all these influences on each other's works.
Yeah.
Is there like one final thing you would like to bring up or question you like to ask?
So, well, I haven't reviewed your oldest videos, so I don't know. But what got you into steampunk? How did you get into it?
Well, I think a pretty similar path to yours, I suppose. Like, I've always been like building stuff from early on,
Hmm.
like making
Yep.
cities out of print boards and all that stuff. So
Oh
there's
yeah.
always been that element. And, I've always been like, when I discovered Ghost in the Shell, I got really into cyberpunk. Of course, Jules Verne. I had like all these
Hmm.
audio cassettes telling the stories, like 80 days around the world. Um, so that's where I would say it got started, and eventually, um, yeah, I really got into history. I started
Hmm.
doing medieval reenactment. Did that for 15 years, or now not 15 years, but like close to that. Then I got back into writing in that time, which was also a melange of history and science fiction, in particular, Dutch Golden Age. Something I also would want to explore at some point in the Association of Istor series.
Cool.
And yeah, that kind of I don't know. Then I started going to a convention, and in that happened to be very close by to where I live, called Emporium Furnesque, and that really got me like hooked into that. part of the community, and then I started a blog called
Very
Tupperware
cool.
Steampunk. Um, that was in
Hmm.
Dutch originally. Then I also started doing that in English, and that finally led to the creation of Radio Retrofuture, and eventually the Steampunk Beginner's Guide.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I guess final word I should. My wife will be mad if I don't say I'm going to put my links in for the books, and so check them out. Check them out. They're not expensive, and we don't have audiobook versions yet. That's one thing I'd like to do. I'd like to get audiobook versions funded because I want to get somebody who's kind of semi-professional because I know how hard it is. It is so hard to read stuff
I
for an
recorded my
audiobook.
own. I still need to finish The Rage in the Machine. I finished Bound
Yeah,
for
it
the
is
Sticks though.
challenging, isn't it? Yeah. So, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to attempt it. Not too hard.
It's a lot of
So,
work. It definitely is.
yep.
I hope to finish The Wrench in the Machine final chapters recording in last week when I had a week off, but I was too busy with the Kickstarter, unfortunately. But that's something that's really on my priority list. But first, I need to
Mhm.
finish the Tipu Sultan and Ghulam Ali videos, um, and then the Kickstarter can launch. So,
All right.
right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, of course, I'll include the links to Vaughn's books in the video description later. Of course, the Kickstarter is currently live, so if you are not yet following, please do so. We're at 100 followers now. I said it, if we reach 125, I'll also commission STL files, which are 3D printable files for the Airborne Dragoons, which are included in the comic. And yeah, we do not have miniatures this time, but we do have the STL files so you can get them printed yourself. So that's how we're gonna do that this time around, and we'll see how that goes. And that, like, does our guest have some words of wisdom for the audience to share?
Well, all I want to say is, check out the Steampunk Desperado channel where the past meets the future and the present is extraordinary. And I always do, and I always miss.
All right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm just going to bid you adieu. And as
Yes.
always,
Adios.
make things your way. Good night.
Thank you.